Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we cut through the noise to get you well-informed, fast. Today we're plunging into a reality that's increasingly undeniable. Climate change. The impacts are here, they're varied, cross-cutting, and sometimes, irreversible. And here's the crucial part. Simply trying to mitigate by cutting greenhouse gases, well, absolutely vital.
Absolutely.
It just isn't enough on its own anymore. We also need to adapt.
Exactly. And that brings us, head on to the central challenge for adaptation. It faces these major hurdles.
Like what?
Well, like the inherent uncertainty about how big the impacts will actually be, often a lack of really accurate, detailed data.
Right.
And this critical, often overlooked issue, the lack of institutional capacities. And for many developing countries, this whole problem is compounded by intense competition for resources, financial, natural, that are already stretched thin. It's a massive roadblock, really.
So our mission in this deep dive is all about unpacking how we can actually assess and maybe more importantly, improve these crucial institutional capacities. We're going to dive into an integrated framework designed specifically for this assessment. And this is where it gets really interesting, we'll see this framework applied to a real-world case, Egypt.
Yeah, concrete example.
Exactly. So you'll walk away understanding not just what's theoretically needed for adaptation, but what the real kind of gritty challenges look like on the ground.
That's the goal.
Okay, so let's start with this core idea of institutional capacity. We hear a lot about adaptation strategies,
right.
Things like natural solutions, managing coastal retreat, insurance programs. They sound great on paper, don't they?
They do.
But developing and implementing them successfully often seems to just hit a wall.
Hey.
So what does this all mean for actually turning those grand plans into, real action?
This is precisely where institutional capacity comes in. Think of it as the ability of an institution's rules, organizations, procedures.
Okay.
Both the formal ones, the written down stuff, and the informal ways things actually get done.
Right, the culture.
Exactly. Their ability to mobilize existing resources to effectively address climate change issues. Fundamentally, it's about how well these systems can plan, implement, and make genuinely informed decisions.
Informed decisions.
Yeah, especially by facilitating that vital connection between, say, scientific research and actual policy making.
Institution can sound a bit academic, though, can't it?
It can, yeah.
Let's bring it back to basics. Maybe think of it as the collective ability of people, systems, structures to actually get things done.
That's a good way to put it.
Like a complex machine, it needs all its parts working together smoothly. We've all seen what happens when one tiny cog is missing or broken.
Well, gridlock, yeah.
Exactly,
yeah.
Gridlock. Now, assessing this capacity isn't easy. Institutions are inherently complex. And climate adaptation, just by its nature, affects so many different sectors, regions, levels.
Yeah.
It's tangled.
And that complexity, that's been a persistent problem in past assessment attempts. Often they focused on very specific areas, like just health or just water. Yeah, exactly. Or they'd hone in on certain criteria, maybe financial resources or coordination awareness levels.
Okay.
And while these gave some valuable insights, the key takeaway is they frequently lacked a comprehensive perspective. They missed the big picture, the multidimensional nature of this capacity. Precisely. They often missed how all the pieces fit together or didn't fit together. So what's missing is a framework that is truly holistic, generic enough to be applied widely, but also specific enough.
Specific enough to be useful.
Right, to give you clear criteria and indicators for the assessment.
So how do we actually measure this institutional muscle then?
Right.
The researchers proposed this framework, distilling it down to 3 core pillars, like foundational supports. Yeah.
Exactly, foundational supports for effective adaptation.
Let's dig into the first one, good governance.
Right, so good governance in this context, it's reflected in things like broad participation, flexibility, transparency, and accountability in how decisions are made.
Okay, broad participation first. What does that involve?
Well, for broad participation to be truly effective and sustainable, stakeholders need the right skills and knowledge. So this pillar breaks down into 4 key criteria.
4 criteria, but...
First, inclusiveness, meaning equal opportunities for all stakeholders to participate. Second, effective communication channels, formal and informal ways for clear info exchange.
Makes sense.
Third, influence, are stakeholders' interests actually considered in decisions? And fourth, stakeholders' capacity, are their skills and knowledge improving so they can engage effectively?
So it's not just about having a seat at the table, but having the ability to speak, be heard, and understand.
Precisely. And good governance isn't just about participation. It's also about being able to pivot, right?
Yeah.
What about that institutional flexibility? What does that look like?
Good question. Institutional flexibility basically means the system can generate alternative objectives, rules, measures when circumstances change. It's about being agile.
Agile. Okay. How do you measure that?
Well, indicators include things like having early warning systems in place, robust monitoring and evaluation M&E systems.
M&E. Crucial.
Crucial. And a consistent frequency of reviewing plans and policies. M&E isn't just a box-ticking exercise. It's that critical feedback loop.
Yeah, that lets strategies evolve instead of becoming obsolete.
Exactly. Keeping them relevant in a changing climate.
Okay. And how do transparency and accountability fit into this governance picture? Is it just about publishing reports?
Not quite. Transparency is vital because it combats corruption, it builds trust, and it actively promotes accountability. So it's foundational.
Right.
Indicators for transparency include things like general public access to information and having clear communication strategies that make that information actually accessible, not just available.
Accessible, key difference.
Yeah. And accountability, meanwhile, means having clear, defined responsibilities. Who does what?
Right.
And that's often strongly supported by those effective M&E systems we mentioned.
Makes sense. You need to know what was supposed to happen to hold someone accountable.
Exactly. And it's really important to stress these aspects of good governance, participation, flexibility, transparency, accountability, they aren't standalone items.
No.
They're deeply interconnected. They just don't work effectively in isolation. One weak link can undermine the others.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. A whole system approach.
Right. So moving to the second pillar, mainstreaming adaptation.
Yeah.
What does that actually mean, and why is it so important for building capacity rather than just having, say, standalone climate projects?
Good question. Mainstreaming adaptation means integrating climate change adaptation measures into existing development plans.
Okay, across the board.
Yeah, at all levels, local, sectoral, national. It means weaving it into risk management strategies, even education programs.
So it's not just an add-on.
Definitely not. It's a fundamental shift in how we approach development. And the benefits, well, it conserves resources, it builds knowledge over time, and crucially, it helps avoid contradictions between those long-term adaptation goals and more immediate development needs. You don't want policies pulling in opposite directions.
Yeah, you see that sometimes.
Right, and weaving it into education, for example, that helps build community resilience by raising awareness, developing skills, just increasing general knowledge among people.
Got it. And finally, the third pillar, strengthening capacities. What are the key areas here that need bolstering for effective adaptation? What are the nuts and bolts?
This pillar focuses on the, let's say, practical elements, human, financial, and technological aspects.
Okay, human first.
Human capacity. This is about the availability of experts, skilled individuals, and importantly, high-quality information to identify needs and options.
Right.
And this can be boosted by targeted capacity-building activities and by directly involving research institutions and policy development, bridging that gap again.
Okay, and financial, always a big one.
Financial capacity, yes. Crucial for actually implementing any strategy. Some countries, like India, have even set up dedicated climate change finance units within their finance ministries.
Interesting.
Yeah, to raise funds and build domestic capacity specifically for climate action.
And technological. What kind of tech are we talking about?
Technological capacity refers to the tools needed for understanding risks, identifying adaptation options, assessing vulnerability.
Okay.
This includes things like early warning systems, prediction systems, especially for extreme weather events. Having the right tech tools is vital.
Okay, so we've built the conceptual house, you could say, with those three pillars: governance, mainstreaming, and strengthening capacities. Now let's open the door and see what it looks like in a real-world scenario. This study tested the framework in Egypt. Before we get into the findings, can you set the stage for us? What are the stakes for Egypt when it comes to climate change? What vulnerabilities are we talking about?
Yeah, the stakes are incredibly high for Egypt.
Yeah.
And very diverse. The source material points to some major vulnerabilities. Declining crop productivity.
Big deal for food security.
Huge. Then there's the inundation of areas in the northern Nile Delta due to sea level rise.
Wow.
Changes to the ecosystems of the northern Egyptian lakes, a projected reduction in the Nile flow itself.
The lifeblood of the country.
Absolutely. Also, increasing mortality and morbidity from things like communicable diseases, heat strokes.
public health impacts.
Right. And even beyond that, the threat of coral reef bleaching in the Red Sea, hitting tourism and biodiversity.
So it really is cross-cutting.
It absolutely is. It paints a pretty stark picture of critical interconnected impacts hitting almost every part of Egyptian life and economy.
Okay, so given that complexity, how did the researchers actually go about applying this framework to Egypt's situation? How did they collect the data?
It was a careful process. First, they characterized Egypt's general situation, geography, socioeconomics, demographics, to really pinpoint the vulnerable sectors and groups.
Laying the groundwork.
Exactly. Then they took the framework's generic indicators and screened them, selecting the ones most applicable to Egypt's specific context. Made it relevant.
Smart.
And finally, they collected the data through extensive, semi-structured interviews. They talked to key stakeholders, representatives across various sectors.
Getting that on-the-ground perspective.
Precisely. Gathering insights on existing capacities, how different players related to each other, decision-making mechanisms, the challenges they faced. It was a thorough, ground-level view.
Fascinating. So after all that work, what did the framework reveal about Egypt's institutional capacity? Let's start with that first pillar, good governance. What did they find regarding participation, flexibility, transparency, accountability?
Yeah, the findings were, well, quite illuminating and a real mix.
Okay.
On the positive side, Egypt does have a formal institutional structure for climate change. It's the National Climate Change Council, the NCCC.
Right.
And it's even been restructured multiple times since it was first set up back in 1997. So the structure exists on paper.
I sense a but coming.
But the weaknesses in how it actually functions in terms of governance were pretty significant.
Okay, like what?
Well, take inclusiveness. The NCCC is notably not inclusive.
How so?
Highly vulnerable sectors like health and tourism are simply not represented on the council.
Wow, okay. That's a big gap.
It's a huge blind spot. And it highlights how even well-intentioned formal structures can create silos, right? Leaving key sectors unheard. The study linked this directly to an absence of proper stakeholder analysis beforehand.
I see. What about communication?
Communication was found to be minimal. It largely depends on personal contacts.
The informal network.
Right, with very limited interaction even within different ministries, and there's no clear overall communication strategy in place.
So information isn't flowing effectively.
Not systematically, no. It's almost like, a professional game of telephone sometimes, whispered conversations instead of clear channels. That's a recipe for missteps with something this complex.
Definitely. And does that affect the council's influence?
It seems to. This lack of broad representation and poor communication leads to limited influence on actual policy making.
For example?
Well, here's a striking example. The NCCC, although it was established in 2007, apparently had no contribution whatsoever to Egypt's 2011 National Strategy for Adaptation.
Really? The main climate council had no input on the National Adaptation Strategy?
According to the findings, yes. It shows that having a seat at the table doesn't automatically mean your voice is heard, let alone acted upon.
That's quite stark. If the formal council isn't inclusive and communication relies on who you know, how do critical insights, especially from the most vulnerable people, actually make it up to decision makers?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it ties directly into the next point, transparency.
Okay, how did Egypt score on transparency?
Transparency was found to be low. Despite those restructurings of the NCCC over the years, the rationale for the changes wasn't made clear. There's no clear mechanism for information exchange between different bodies or with the public.
So it's hard to know why decisions are made.
Very hard. Even public data you might find from the Egyptian Environmental Affairs Agency, the EEAAA, it often lacks details on the actual decision-making process.
And didn't you mention something about internet access earlier?
Yes, and this is crucial for transparency in the modern age.
Yeah.
The study highlighted that 71% of the Egyptian population do not have access to the internet.
71%.
Yeah. That severely hinders any effort towards broad transparency and information sharing. How do you effectively communicate complex strategies when that huge digital divide exists?
It completely changes the game for public engagement. What about accountability then?
Accountability also showed major weaknesses. First off, there's no specific regulatory framework for climate change in Egypt.
No dedicated climate law.
Apparently not. Responsibilities for the NCCC itself are described as generic. And here's a shocker. About 40% of the interviewed officials in sectors supposedly represented on the council didn't even know what their roles and responsibilities were regarding the council's work.
40%? That's astonishing.
It really is. It brings home that point that a title or a seat means very little if roles aren't crystal clear and communicated.
Absolutely.
Plus, there's no integrated national action plan for the adaptation strategy, and the sectoral plans that do exist are fragmented and lack consistent monitoring and evaluation. So holding anyone accountable is extremely difficult.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot of significant hurdles under the good governance pillar. What about mainstreaming adaptation? Pillar 2. Are they managing to integrate climate considerations into broader national plans, or is it stuck in a silo?
Unfortunately, the study found that integration of climate adaptation into national development plans is largely rare.
Rare, okay.
Egypt's Vision 2030 strategy, for instance, reportedly paid less attention to climate change adaptation compared to other environmental issues like solid waste or air pollution.
Ah, the more immediate visible problems, perhaps.
That seems to be a factor. It illustrates that common challenge where immediate, tangible environmental problems can overshadow the slower burning, but potentially more catastrophic adaptation needs.
Right. Is there any mainstreaming happening?
There is some happening at the sectoral level, for example, in agriculture and water resources. There are efforts.
Okay, so pockets of it.
Pockets, exactly. But it's not happening consistently at the national scale. It feels more like a piecemeal approach rather than a truly integrated whole-of-government strategy.
Got it. Okay, and the final pillar. Strengthening capacities. Human, financial, technological resources. What did the study find there? Are they building the muscle needed to implement things?
Well, starting with human resources, the findings suggest they are very limited.
How limited?
For example, the Central Department for Climate Change within the EEA, the main environmental agency, reportedly has only 4 staff members.
4. For the whole country's climate change department.
That's what the study indicated, yes. And even in institutions with more staff, like the Central Laboratory of Agricultural Climate, only about 40% are actually technical staff.
So a shortage of expertise.
A real lack of specialized staff.
And limited efforts for improvement, too. The EEAA apparently organized only one single workshop on vulnerability assessment in the past 10 years.
1 in 10 years. That's stark.
It really indicates the resource constraints.
Okay, what about financial resources? Is there money allocated?
This is another major bottleneck. Climate change adaptation has essentially no dedicated funds in the national budget.
None. So where does the money come from?
Almost entirely from external donors and international funding agencies. Think STDF, the Green Climate Fund, GIZ, UNDP.
So reliant on international aid.
Heavily reliant. And this creates unsustainable financial resources. Donor priorities can, and often do, shift or might conflict with specific national needs.
Right, it makes long-term planning difficult.
Extremely difficult. It hinders consistent long-term capacity building and the implementation of national action plans. It becomes a donor-driven agenda, which isn't ideal for building sustainable, homegrown capacity.
I can see that. And finally, technological capacity. On the technological front, the framework emphasizes the need for things like prediction systems, M&E tools.
Yeah.
The Egypt case study didn't go into extreme detail on specific technologies, but it highlighted a general limited capacity across these crucial areas for the key players involved. So the overall picture is consistent. Very limited human, financial, and technological capacities.
Okay. So we've seen the framework, and we've seen it applied in Egypt, revealing some pretty significant challenges across all 3 pillars. What does this all mean when we bring it back to our listener? What's the so what from this deep dive?
Yeah, the so what. I think the Egypt case study assessed using this framework really drives home a crucial point.
Which is?
That even if you have a formal institutional structure on paper, like the NCCC, your actual ability to adapt effectively can be severely hampered by weaknesses in governance, like lack of inclusiveness, transparency, accountability, and by critical shortages in resources.
No, the structure isn't enough.
Not even close. This assessment framework isn't just theoretical. It works in practice to pinpoint exactly where the weaknesses lie. It highlights concrete opportunities for improvement.
Right.
It tells us, loud and clear, that formal structures alone are insufficient. It's the functionality of the system, how it actually operates, communicates, makes decisions, uses resources that's paramount for building true adaptive capacity.
And that's a lesson that probably applies far beyond Egypt.
Absolutely. The universal lesson here is that you can have the best intentions, the right boxes checked on an org chart, but if those underlying mechanisms, governance, mainstreaming, resources aren't functioning well together, then genuine adaptation just stalls. It gets stuck.
What an incredibly insightful deep dive. It really highlights that building resilience to the climate impacts we know are coming requires this laser focus on the underlying institutional muscle, not just the glossy plans or strategies.
Exactly. Knowing how to assess those capacities, digging into the governance, the mainstreaming efforts, the strengthening of resources, that's the absolutely critical first step.
The first step towards adaptation that actually works.
Yes, allowing countries, communities, organizations to move beyond just planning and into real, effective action on the ground.
So a final thought for you, our listener, to maybe take away and mull over. Considering this framework, governance, mainstreaming, strengthening capacities, where might you look for similar strengths or perhaps weaknesses in how your own community or maybe your organization tackles complex long-term challenges, even ones beyond climate change?